The merchant ship Starlight moved slowly through the dark space between stars. Captain Jake Martinez sat in his chair on the bridge, watching the stars pass by on the main screen. His ship was not fancy or fast, but it was reliable. For 15 years, he had carried cargo and passengers across the galaxy, making enough money to keep flying. The crew was mixed, as most ships were these days. Lisa Thompson, his first officer, was human like him. She had served in the Earth Defense Force before joining his crew. The navigation officer was a tall, blue-skinned Altarian named Vex Ko, whose people were known for their skill with star maps. The engine room was run by two Corvin brothers, their thick arms perfect for the heavy work needed to keep the old engines running. Today they carried 30 passengers, all refugees fleeing from the Outer Rim. The Vex Empire was expanding again, taking over planets and enslaving anyone who could not fight back. Jake had seen this before. Every few years, the Vrex would decide they needed more workers or more resources, and peaceful worlds would suffer. "Captain, we are approaching Nexus Prime," announced Vex Ko from his station. "Docking permission granted for Bay 7, Jake nodded. Nexus Prime was one of the largest trade stations in this part of the galaxy. It was neutral territory where ships from many different worlds could meet and trade safely. He hoped to find new cargo here, and maybe some paying passengers heading toward Earth or the other human colonies. The docking went smoothly. Jake walked down to the cargo bay to help the refugees gather their belongings. Most of them had very little. Families carried single bags holding everything they owned. Children stayed close to their parents, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Among the passengers was an old Altarian who had kept to himself during the journey. His skin was darker blue than most of his people, marked with the deep lines. Of great age, he wore simple brown robes and carried only a small leather bag. Jake had noticed him reading from an old book during the trip. "Excuse me, sir," Jake said to the old Altarian. "Do you have somewhere to go on the station? I know some people who might help refugees find temporary housing." The old man looked up with bright, intelligent eyes. "You are kind, Captain Martinez. I am Zeth Ka, formerly a teacher at the University of Altara Prime. I have a small amount of money saved. I will manage." "What happened to your world?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Zethka's face grew sad. "The Vrex came 3 months ago. They said we had resources they needed. Our people tried to negotiate to offer trade agreements. The Vrex do not negotiate. They simply take what they want." He paused, looking down at his book. "We had no defenders, no warriors. We were a world of teachers, artists, and farmers. What could we do against warships?" Jake felt anger building in his chest. This was the same story he had heard too many times. Peaceful worlds being conquered because they had no way to fight back? The galactic government did nothing. They said it was not their business to interfere in territorial disputes. "In the old days," Zethka continued, "there were protectors, beings who traveled the galaxy defending those who could not defend themselves. They were called knights." Lisa Thompson, who had been helping nearby refugees, stopped and looked over. "Knights?" she asked. "Yes," Zethka said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher. "Long ago there were warriors who followed a code of honor. They protected the weak and fought injustice wherever they found it. They asked for nothing in return except the knowledge that they had done what was right." One of the younger refugees, a Zephyrian female with pale green skin, spoke up. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the knights. She said they rode ships made of starlight and carried swords that could cut through any armor." "But those are just old tales for children?" Zethka shook his head slowly. "Not just tales, child. The records exist in the old archives. The knights were real. They kept peace in the galaxy for 1,000 years. But they vanished, and no one remembers why. Now, when evil spreads across the stars, there is no one to stand against it." Jake exchanged a look with Lisa. Both of them were thinking the same thing. On Earth, everyone knew about knights. They learned about them in school, read about them in books, watched movies about their adventures. Knights were part of human history and culture. The idea of warriors who protected others was not strange to humans at all after the refugees had left the ship. Jake and Lisa sat in the ship's small dining area drinking coffee. The rest of the crew was either sleeping or working on maintenance tasks. "Did you hear what that old teacher said about knights?" Lisa asked. "Hard to miss," Jake replied. "Sounds like something we humans might know a thing or two about." Lisa leaned forward. "I served 8 years in the defense force before I came to work for you. I remember the history lessons. King Arthur and the Round Table, the Knights Templar, the Code of Chivalry. Protect the innocent, defend the weak, show mercy to enemies." She paused. "Jake, what if we could bring that back?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if humans remembered what the galaxy has forgotten? What if we became the knights this time?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Outside the small window, he could see the busy docks of Nexus Prime, ships from dozens of different worlds loaded and unloaded cargo. Families of refugees searched for new homes. Merchants made deals that would make them rich while others struggled to survive. "The Vrex Empire has 100 warships," Jake said finally. "They have conquered 50 worlds in the last 10 years. What could a few humans with old ideals do against that kind of power?" "Maybe more than you think," Lisa replied. "Remember what happened at the Battle of Thermopylae? 300 Spartans held off the entire Persian army, not because they were stronger, but because they believed in something worth fighting for." Jake thought about Zethka's sad face, about the refugee families carrying everything they owned in single bags, about the children who would grow up without homes because no one had been willing to help their parents. He made a decision that would change everything. "Send a message to Earth Command," he said. "Tell them Captain Jake Martinez requests permission to address the Colonial Council. Tell them it's about forming a new kind of military unit." Lisa smiled. "What kind of unit?" "The kind that follows an old code. The kind that remembers what it means to be a knight." 3 days later, Jake stood before the Colonial Council on Earth. The message had spread quickly through human space. The idea of bringing back the knights had caught people's imagination. Military officers, merchant captains, even civilian volunteers were asking to join. Admiral Helen Price, the head of the Colonial Defense Force, listened as Jake explained what he had seen in the Outer Rim. She had read the reports about Vrex expansion, but hearing about it from someone who had helped the refugees made it real. "You're talking about more than just a military unit," she said when Jake finished. "You're talking about changing how humans act in the galaxy." "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied. "I think we are." Admiral Price was quiet for a long moment, then she stood up. "Captain Martinez, the Colonial Defense Force hereby authorizes the formation of experimental units based on historical knightly orders. You will have volunteers, ships, and equipment. Your mission is to protect innocent life wherever you find it threatened." Jake felt something stir in his chest. Pride, maybe, or hope. "Thank you, Admiral." "Don't thank me yet, Captain. Being a knight was never easy. Now you have to prove that old ideals can work in a modern galaxy." As Jake left the council chamber, he thought about Zethka and his book of old stories. Soon those stories might become real again. The galaxy had forgotten about knights, but humanity was about to remind them. The news traveled fast across human space. Within a week of Admiral Price's announcement, volunteers were lining up at recruitment centers on every human world. Some were former military officers looking for a new purpose. Others were merchant captains like Jake, who had seen too much suffering in the Outer Rim. Many were young people who had grown up reading about knights and wanted to make those old stories real. Commander Ryan Blake was the first to step forward. He had spent 12 years commanding patrol ships for the Earth Defense Force, fighting pirates and protecting trade routes. When he heard about the knightly orders, he knew this was what he had been waiting for his whole career. Blake stood in Admiral Price's office 3 weeks after Jake's speech to the Colonial Council. Behind the Admiral's desk hung pictures of famous battles and the flags of human colonies scattered across the galaxy. "Commander Blake," Admiral Price said, looking at his service record on her computer screen. "Your file says you have commanded Everything from patrol boats to heavy cruisers. You have fought in 16 major engagements and never lost a ship under your command. Why do you want to join this new experiment? Blake thought for a moment before answering. Ma'am, I joined the defense force to protect people. But most of the time, we only protect human worlds and human ships. The nightly orders could protect everyone. That matters to me, Admiral Price nodded. The Order of the Silver Star needs a commander. Are you interested? Yes, ma'am. Good. You will have 12 ships to start with. Light cruisers and destroyers, all volunteers crews. Your mission is fleet protection and space combat. But remember, Commander, you are not just military officers anymore. You are knights. That means something different. Blake saluted. I understand, Admiral. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, Colonel Maria Santos was saying goodbye to her family. She had commanded ground troops in 3 different conflicts, but this felt different. Her 8-year-old daughter hugged her legs as she prepared to leave. Mom, are you really going to be a knight like in the old stories? The little girl asked. Maria knelt down to look her daughter in the eyes. Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to help protect people who can't protect themselves. Like the princes in the tower? Maria smiled. Like everyone who needs help? Maria had been chosen to lead the Order of the Golden Shield, the ground combat division of the new knightly orders. She would have 5,000 troops under her command. All volunteers who had sworn the same oath she had taken a week earlier. The oath was simple but powerful. Jake Martinez had written it himself, drawing from the old knightly codes he had studied as a child. I swear to protect the innocent, defend the weak, show mercy to my enemies, and give my life if necessary to uphold justice and honor. Every member of every order spoke these words before they could wear the armor or carry the weapons of a knight. The Third Order was led by Captain Alex Johnson, a former rescue ship commander who had saved hundreds of lives during mining accidents and ship disasters. The Order of the Azure Lance would handle rescue operations and medical aid. Johnson had volunteered the moment he heard about the project. We're not just soldiers, Johnson told his officers during their first meeting. We're healers, rescuers, and protectors. Our job is to save lives, not just win battles. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Supreme Commander Vorth of the Vrex Empire was reading intelligence reports about human military movements. Vorth was a massive creature, even by Vrex standards. His thick gray skin was covered with scars from 100 battles. His red eyes showed no mercy or kindness. What are the humans doing? He asked his intelligence officer, a smaller Vrex named Krexstar. They appear to be forming new military units, Supreme Commander. They call themselves Knights. Intelligence suggests they are planning to interfere with our expansion operations. Vorth made a sound that might have been laughter if it had come from a human throat. Knights, like the old fairy tales? The humans think they can stop the Empire. With bedtime stories? Should we be concerned, Supreme Commander? Concerned about humans playing dress-up? No, but we should accelerate our timeline. The next target is the world called Harmony. The Zephyrians there have resources we need, and they have no military to speak of. We will take that world before these human knights can organize themselves. On Harmony, Prime Minister Kalasu was having her own meeting. The Zephyrians were a peaceful people who had never fought a war in their recorded history. Their world was covered with farms and small cities where families had lived in peace for generations. They had no armies, no weapons, and no experience with violence. The Vrex fleet is 3 weeks away, reported her aide, a young Zephyrian named Velmo. Our scout ships have confirmed it. 50 warships heading directly for our system. Kalasu felt fear in her heart, but she tried not to show it. Have we heard anything from the Galactic Council? They say it is an internal matter. They will not interfere? And the other worlds? Will anyone help us? Velmo shook his head sadly. Most are too afraid of the Vrex to get involved. But there is one strange report. Some human ships are heading toward our system. They say they are knights, and they want to protect us. Kalasu had heard the old stories about knights, but like most people in the galaxy, she thought they were just myths. How many ships? 37 so far, but more are coming. They have sent a message asking permission to defend our world. Kelasu thought about her people, farmers and teachers and artists who had never hurt anyone, children who played in gardens and learned about the stars in school, families who had lived on harmony for hundreds of years. The Vrex would enslave them all or worse. Send a message to these human knights, she said. Tell them we accept their offer of protection. Tell them we are grateful for their courage. Back on Earth, Admiral Price was coordinating the largest military operation humans had ever attempted. Ships from every human world were joining the mission to Harmony. Not just military vessels, but merchant ships, exploration craft, and even private yachts. Anyone who could help was volunteering. Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of his ship, now renamed the Knight's Promise. His old merchant vessel had been equipped with better weapons and stronger shields. More importantly, it flew a banner showing the symbol of the knightly orders, a silver star on a blue field. Captain, Lisa Thompson said from her station, we're receiving reports from scouts near Harmony. The Vrex fleet is bigger than we thought. 80 ships, including battle cruisers. Jake nodded calmly. How many ships do we have? 43 confirmed, with more arriving every day. But Captain, most of our ships are smaller than theirs. If this becomes a straight fight, we might not win. Then we make sure it doesn't become a straight fight, Jake replied. Knights don't fight for victory, Lisa. They fight for what's right. Sometimes that's more powerful than bigger guns. Across the galaxy, beings watched the news reports with interest. Most had never heard of knights, except in old stories. Some thought the humans were crazy to challenge the Vrex Empire. Others hoped quietly that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally willing to stand up to bullies. On the trading station where this all began, Zethka sat in a small restaurant reading his ancient book. A human news reporter approached his table. Excuse me, sir, you're Altarian, aren't you? What do you think about these human knights heading to defend Harmony? Zethka looked up from his book and smiled for the first time in months. I think the galaxy is about to remember what it has forgotten. I think the age of knights has returned, and it is about time. The reporter looked confused. But do you really think they can win against the Vrex Empire? Young man, Zethka said, closing his book gently, winning and succeeding are not always the same thing. Sometimes the most important victories have nothing to do with who has the bigger army. As the old teacher spoke, ships continued to gather. Near Harmony, human vessels with colorful banners and ancient symbols painted on their hulls. For the first time in centuries, knights were riding to the rescue, and the galaxy was watching. The Vrex fleet arrived at Harmony like a dark storm cloud across the stars. 80 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their black hulls reflecting no light. At the center of the fleet was the massive dreadnought Conqueror, flagship of Admiral Krexvoar. Admiral Krexvoar was Supreme Commander Vorth's most trusted general. He had conquered 15 worlds for the Empire and had never shown mercy to anyone who stood in his way. Today should have been another easy victory. The intelligence report said Harmony had no military, no defenses, and no allies willing to help them. But as the Vrex ships moved toward the planet, Krexvoar saw something that made him pause. Human ships were positioned between his fleet and Harmony, not hiding behind the planet or running away, but waiting in open space like they wanted to fight. How many human vessels? Krexvoar asked his tactical officer. 52 ships, Admiral. Most are smaller than our cruisers. Their formation is strange. They appear to be protecting civilian evacuation ships rather than preparing for attack. Krexvoar studied the display screen. The humans had arranged their ships in a defensive pattern around a dozen large civilian vessels that were moving slowly away from Harmony. It made no military sense. Any smart commander would concentrate all their firepower for an attack. Commander Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Star Guard. Around him, his officers watched their instruments as the massive Vrex fleet approached. Blake felt nervous, but he also felt something else. Purpose. For the first time in his military career, he knew exactly why he was fighting. All ships, this is Commander Blake. he said into his communication device. Remember, we are not here to destroy the enemy fleet. We are here to protect the innocent. Every civilian ship that escapes safely is a victory. Every life we save matters more than any enemy ship we destroy. On the planet below, Colonel Maria Santos and her Order of the Golden Shield were helping with the evacuation. Thousands of Zephyrian families were loading onto transport ships, carrying only what they could hold in their arms. Children cried as they left their homes. Parents tried to comfort them while hiding their own fears. "Colonel," called Lieutenant Ben Parker, one of her officers, "the Vrex landing ships are launching. Looks like they plan to attack the evacuation centers directly." Maria looked up at the sky where she could see the tiny lights of the space battle beginning. "How long until the transports are loaded?" "At least 2 more hours, ma'am. Then we hold them for 2 hours." Maria turned to address her troops. 5,000 human soldiers who had volunteered to stand between the Vrex army and helpless civilians. "Listen up, everyone. Those families behind us have no weapons, no training, and nowhere to run. Today we show the galaxy what knights really do. We stand between evil and innocence, no matter the cost." The space battle began when the Vrex opened fire with their main guns. Blake watched the energy beams streak toward his ships. Instead of returning fire immediately, he gave an order that surprised his own officers. "All ships, priority to the evacuation vessels. Use your ships as shields if necessary." The human destroyer Courage moved directly into the path of Vrex fire meant for a civilian transport. The destroyer's shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the attack. The transport ship, carrying 3,000 Zephyrian refugees, continued safely toward the edge of the system. Admiral Krexvoar watched this happen with confusion. "Why are they protecting the civilian ships instead of fighting us?" "Unknown, Admiral. It appears to be their primary mission." "Fools! Destroy the civilian vessels? That will force them to fight properly." But when the Vrex targeted the evacuation ships, something amazing happened. Human vessels threw themselves in front of every attack. The light cruiser Honor took 3 direct hits to protect a medical ship full of Zephyrian children. The corvette Justice rammed a Vrex destroyer that was chasing damaged civilian craft. News reporters from across the galaxy were broadcasting the battle live. Beings who had never heard of knights watched human ships sacrifice themselves to save alien civilians they had never met. The images spread through the galactic communication network in minutes on the Altarian homeworld. Zethka sat in a refugee center watching the news with hundreds of other displaced people. Tears ran down his old face as he saw the human ship Defender explode while protecting a transport full of Zephyrian families. "Look," he whispered to the people around him. "Look and remember, the knights have returned." Down on Harmony's surface, the battle was just as fierce. Vrex landing craft delivered thousands of soldiers armed with heavy weapons and battle armor. They advanced toward the evacuation centers expecting to find only frightened civilians. Instead, they found Colonel Santos and her Golden Shield Knights dug into defensive positions. The humans had set up their lines not to win territory, but to protect the civilians behind them. Every position was chosen to give families more time to reach. The transport ships. "Here they come," Sergeant Katie Moore called out as the first wave of Vrex soldiers appeared. The enemy moved in tight formations, their weapons ready to kill anyone in their path. "Remember the code," Maria called to her troops. "Protect the innocent. Show mercy when possible. Fight with honor." The Vrex attacked with overwhelming force, but they found something they had never encountered before. Human soldiers who would not retreat even when surrounded. Knights who shared their food with enemy wounded. Warriors who risked their lives to rescue Vrex soldiers from burning vehicles. Private Danny Clark was treating a wounded Zephyrian child when Vrex soldiers surrounded his position. Instead of surrendering or running, he stood over the child with his weapon ready. "You want to hurt this kid, you go through me first," he said. The Vrex soldiers had never seen anything like it. One of them, a young warrior named Grak-10, hesitated. He had been told that all other species were weak and cowardly. But this human was ready to die for a child that was not even his own species. "Captain, Alex Johnson and his Order of the Azure Lance were everywhere at once. Their ships moved through the battle zone, rescuing damaged vessels and treating wounded from both sides. When the Vrex cruiser Dark Fang was damaged by debris, Johnson's medical ship moved to help. "Captain," his medical officer Dr. Nancy White said, "those are enemy soldiers." "They're wounded beings who need help," Johnson replied. "That's what we do." The Azure Lance rescued 47 Vrex sailors from the Dark Fang when Admiral HFY demanded their return. Johnson sent a message that confused the Vrex commander even more. "The wounded are being treated according to their needs. They will be returned when they are healthy." This is the way of knights. As the battle continued, something strange began to happen. Vrex soldiers started hesitating before firing on the humans. Some began to question orders to target civilian centers. A few even helped wounded humans when their officers were not watching. The turning point came when a Vrex battle cruiser, the Iron Fist, was badly damaged and began falling toward Harmony's surface. If it crashed, it would destroy a city full of Zephyrian civilians. The logical military choice was to let it fall and eliminate enemy forces. Commander Blake made a different choice. "All ships emergency rescue operation. We need to stabilize that cruiser before it hits the city." Human ships surrounded the falling Vrex vessel, using their tractor beams and engines to slow its descent. The destroyer Valor was crushed when the much larger cruiser shifted, but the combined effort of 12 human ships managed to bring the Iron Fist down in an empty field instead of the city. Admiral HFY watched from his flagship as human knights saved a Vrex crew and protected Zephyrian civilians with the same action. He had fought in 50 battles, but he had never seen anything like this. "Admiral," his communication officer said, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. The news networks are calling it the Battle of Honor. They're saying the humans fight like the ancient knights from the old stories." HFY looked at the tactical display. His fleet was winning in terms of ships destroyed and territory taken, but something felt wrong. This was not victory as he understood it. On the surface, the last evacuation ships were lifting off. Colonel Santos and her knights had held their positions for 6 hours, long enough for 90% of Harmony's population to escape safely. The cost had been high. Many good people had died today. But as Maria watched the transport ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying families to safety, she knew it had been worth it. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was learning. For the first time in centuries, someone had chosen to protect the weak instead of conquering them. The Age of Knights had truly begun. 3 months after the Battle of Harmony, the galaxy was a different place. News reports about the human knights played on every world. Videos of human soldiers sharing food with enemy prisoners spread through communication networks. Images of knights sacrificing their ships to save civilian transports became symbols of hope for billions of beings on the industrial world of Forge Prime. War Chief Raxton of the Saurian people called a meeting of his clan leaders. The Saurians were a proud reptilian species known for their strength and their skill at building ships and weapons. For generations, they had worked as laborers and miners, often treated poorly by the companies that hired them. "Fellow warriors," Raxton said to the gathered leaders, his thick scales gleaming under the meeting hall lights, "we have all seen the reports from Harmony. These human knights have shown us something we had forgotten. Strength is meant to protect the weak, not to serve only the powerful." The clan leaders murmured agreement. For too long, their people had been treated as nothing more than cheap labor. Mining companies worked them in dangerous conditions for little pay. When workers were injured, they were simply replaced? "What do you propose, War Chief?" asked Seknal, leader of the Steel Scale clan. "I propose we form our own knightly order, the Scaled Guardians. We will protect workers' rights, ensure fair treatment, and stand against those who would abuse the powerless." The idea spread quickly through Saurian communities. Within weeks, thousands of Saurian workers had taken oaths similar to those spoken by human knights. They painted their work tools with symbols of honor and began wearing simple armor over their work clothes. When mining bosses tried to force unsafe working conditions, They found themselves facing organized resistance from beings who were no longer afraid, the mining company. NovaCorp learned this the hard way when they tried to cut safety equipment at their largest facility. 200 scaled guardians, led by Raxton himself, peacefully occupied the mine entrance. You will provide proper safety gear, fair wages, and reasonable working hours, Raxton told the company manager, or this mine stays closed. The manager, a nervous human named Pete Wilson, tried to call security. But the security guards, many of whom were also Saurians, had joined the scaled guardians. The company had no choice but to negotiate. Meanwhile, on the ocean world of Aquatica, Admiral Coral Song was addressing the Nereid Council. The Nereids were an aquatic species whose graceful forms were perfectly suited for underwater life. Their world was covered entirely by vast oceans, and they had always been peaceful traders who carried goods between the stars. The trade routes are becoming more dangerous every day, Coral Song reported to the council. Pirates attack merchant vessels because they know most captains will not fight back. Innocent traders lose their cargo, their ships, and sometimes their lives. Elder Deep Current, oldest member of the council, spoke with the wisdom of centuries. What do you suggest, Admiral? I suggest we learn from the human knights. We form the Tide Wardens, protectors of all who travel the space lanes. We escort merchant vessels, hunt down pirates, and ensure that trade can flow safely between worlds, the Nereid Council agreed. Within days, fast Nereid ships began patrolling the major trade routes. They moved in groups, their sleek vessels painted with symbols of protection and honor. When pirates attacked merchant convoys, they found themselves facing opponents who fought not for profit, but for justice. Captain Finn Bright of the Tide Wardens intercepted a pirate attack on a convoy carrying medical supplies to refugee camps. The pirates expected an easy victory over unarmed cargo ships. Instead, they faced Nereid warriors who fought with the skill of their ancestors and the honor of knights. Surrender your weapons and return what you have stolen, Finbright commanded over the communication channel. We offer you the chance to choose a better path. Some pirates chose to fight and were defeated. Others, surprised by the offer of mercy, laid down their weapons and agreed to work honestly. The Tide Wardens kept their word, helping former pirates find legitimate jobs on merchant vessels or colony worlds. Back in human space, Captain Jake Martinez stood before a new group of volunteers at the Night Academy he had established on Haven. Rock, the asteroid base, had been converted into a training facility where beings from across the galaxy came to learn knightly values and fighting techniques. Being a knight is not about having the best weapons or the strongest armor, Jake told the mixed group of humans and aliens. It's about making the choice to help others, even when it's difficult or dangerous. In the audience sat beings from a dozen different species. A young Altarian who wanted to protect refugee families like his own. A former Vrek soldier who had seen too much cruelty and wanted to make amends. A Zephyrian farmer who wished to ensure that what happened to Harmony never happened to another peaceful world. Among the students was Kyle Murphy, a tough human who had grown up in the mining colonies of the Terran Belt. Kyle had seen mining. Companies treat workers like machines, caring only about profits. When the Scaled Guardians formed, Kyle decided humans needed their own order to protect workers and colonists. I want to form a new order, Kyle told Jake after a training session. The Stone Guard will protect mining colonies and industrial worlds from exploitation and abuse. Jake nodded approvingly. Every world, every group of people deserves protection. The more knightly orders we have, the better. Kyle returned to the mining colonies with authorization to recruit and train the Stone Guard. He found eager volunteers among miners, factory workers, and colonists who had long been ignored by distant governments. They took their oaths in simple ceremonies, swearing to protect the rights and dignity of working people everywhere. The Stone Guard's first test came when the corporation Stellar Industries tried to take over the independent mining colony on Ceres Prime. The company had bought the legal rights to the asteroid and planned to evict the families who had lived there for generations. General Kyle Murphy, as he was now called, led 200 Stone Guard Knights to Ceres Prime. They stood between the corporate security forces and the miners' homes, their simple armor bearing the symbol of a hammer and shield. These people built this colony with their own hands, Kyle told the corporate representative. They have the right to stay and work fairly for their efforts. The confrontation made galactic news. For the first time, working people had protectors who were willing to stand up to powerful corporations. Other mining colonies began forming their own Stone Guard chapters. Even within the Vrex Empire, things were changing. Commander Korthrex had fought at Harmony and had seen things that troubled his sleep. The way human knights treated captured Vrex soldiers with kindness instead of cruelty. The sight of human medics risking their lives to save Vrex wounded, Korthrex secretly met with human representatives on the neutral world of Haven Station. The meeting was arranged through a former Vrex prisoner who had been treated well by the Knights and had chosen not to return to the Empire. I speak for many Vrex officers who are tired of conquest and cruelty, Korthrex told the human negotiator, a diplomatic knight named Ambassador Carol Turner. We wish to protect Vrex civilians who oppose the Empire's methods. Can your knights help us? Carol studied the scarred Vrex commander. In his red eyes, she saw something she had not expected. Genuine remorse and a desire to change. The knightly code applies to all who choose to follow it, she said. If you truly wish to protect the innocent regardless of their species, then you can become a knight yourself. And so began the first Vrex knightly order, the Iron Oath, dedicated to protecting Vrex civilians from their own government's oppression. They worked in secret at first, helping families escape to neutral worlds and sabotaging military operations that targeted non-combatants. Supreme Commander Vorth grew increasingly angry as reports reached him of his own people turning against the Empire. Worse, other species were forming their own knightly orders based on human examples. The galaxy that had once cowered before Vrex might was now standing up and fighting back. How did this happen? Vorth demanded of his advisors. How did a few human idealists turn the entire galaxy against us? Intelligence Officer Krexstar had been studying the night phenomenon for months. Supreme Commander, they did not turn the galaxy against us with weapons or threats. They simply reminded everyone that there is a choice between being a victim and being a protector. Many beings have chosen to be protectors. Vorth smashed his fist on the table. Then we will show them the price of defying the Empire. Prepare the entire fleet. We will crush these knights and their naive ideals once and for all. But across the galaxy, knights of many species were preparing too. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for, and some things were worth dying to protect. The Age of Knights had truly begun, and it would not be easily ended. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Harmony, and the galaxy was unrecognizable from what it had been before. On the neutral world of Concordia, representatives from 43 different knightly orders gathered in the largest assembly hall ever built. Beings from hundreds of species sat together, all wearing the symbols of their orders, all united by the same code of honor. Jake Martinez, now bearing the title Grand Knight of the Outer Rim, stood at the center of the great hall. His hair had gone gray in the years since he first decided to help the refugees, but his eyes still held the same determination that had started everything. Friends, allies, fellow knights, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. We gather today not as separate species or distant worlds, but as guardians of justice and protectors of the innocent. Today we establish the galactic code of honor that will guide us all. In the front row sat the authors of the code, Dr. Patricia Bell, a human legal scholar who had spent 3 years studying the laws and customs of every known species, and Zethka, the old Altarian teacher whose words about forgotten knights had inspired this entire movement. Together, they had created a document that respected the traditions of all peoples while establishing universal principles of justice and mercy. Dr. Bell stood to address the assembly. The Galactic Code contains 7 fundamental principles, she announced. First, protect those who cannot protect themselves. Second, show mercy to defeated enemies. Third, treat all prisoners with dignity and respect. Fourth, provide aid to any being in need, regardless of species or allegiance. Fifth, use force only when necessary and only to protect others. Sixth, speak truth and keep your word once given. Seventh, sacrifice personal gain for the greater good. The hall erupted in cheers as representatives from every order stood to approve the code. Raxton of the Scaled Guardians raised his clawed hand in agreement. Admiral Choral Song of the Tide Wardens sang the traditional Nereid song of acceptance. Even Commander Korthrex, representing the reformed Vrex Republic, stood and pledged his people's support. But the most surprising moment came when a new voice spoke from the back of the hall. Former Supreme Commander Vorth, now simply called Vorth the Redeemed, stepped forward. The massive Vrex leader had been captured 2 years earlier during the final battle for the Vrex homeworld. Instead of executing him, the knights had offered him the chance to see what his empire had become. "I have seen my people living in fear of their own government," Vorth said, his deep voice filled with regret. "I have seen the colonies we conquered. And I have seen the joy on faces of beings who are finally free. The knights showed me mercy when I deserved none. Today I speak for the Vrex Republic when I say we accept this code and ask forgiveness for the pain we have caused." The transformation of the Vrex Empire had taken 3 years of careful work. Rather than simply destroying their military, the knights had offered a different path. Vrex worlds were given the choice to join a new democratic republic or remain independent. Most chose freedom. Those who had committed war crimes were put on trial, but even they were treated with the dignity the code demanded. The process had not been without violence. Some Vrex commanders had refused to accept defeat and had fought bitter campaigns on the Outer Rim worlds. But for every battle the knights fought, they also won converts through their actions. Vrex soldiers who saw knights sharing food with prisoners began to question their orders. Vrex officers who watched knights risk their lives to save Vrex. Civilians began to change their thinking. The final turning point had come during the siege of Vrex Prime. Instead of bombarding the planet from orbit, the knights had surrounded it and waited. They had broadcast messages of peace and offered safe passage to any Vrex civilian who wanted to leave. When food supplies on the planet began to run low, the knights had sent relief ships with medical supplies and food. "Why do you help us?" a Vrex child had asked Captain Alex Johnson during one of the relief missions. "We are your enemies." Johnson had knelt down to look the child in the eyes. "You are not my enemy. You are just a child who is hungry and scared. Helping you is what knights do." That moment, broadcast across the galaxy, had done more to end the war than any weapon could have. Within weeks, Vrex civilians were openly supporting the knights, and the old empire collapsed from within. Now, 5 years later, the galaxy was at peace for the first time in centuries. Trade flowed freely under the protection of the Tide Wardens. Workers across the galaxy were treated fairly thanks to the Scaled Guardians and Stone Guard. Refugees found safety and new homes with the help of dozens of humanitarian knightly orders. The ceremony on Concordia continued as each order was formally recognized and their symbols added to the great banner that would fly over the Hall of Knights. The Order of the Silver Star's silver star on blue field. The Golden Shield's crossed sword and shield. The Azure Lance's medical cross surrounded by stars. Dozens of others, each representing the hopes and dreams of different peoples united in common cause. Prime Minister Kalasu of Harmony, now representing the peaceful wardens, stood to address the assembly. 5 years ago, my world faced destruction. We had no weapons, no defenses, and no hope. Then humans came to help us, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Today, we choose to help others in the same way. The peaceful wardens had become one of the most respected orders in the galaxy. They specialized in diplomatic protection, conflict resolution, and peacekeeping. Their gentle approach had prevented 3 wars and helped negotiate peaceful solutions to dozens of disputes. As the ceremony concluded, Jake Martinez found himself thinking about his old ship, the Starlight. It now sat in the Museum of Galactic History on Earth, its cargo bay converted into an exhibit about the beginnings of the knightly movement. Millions of visitors came each year to see the simple merchant vessel that had carried the first refugees and sparked a revolution of compassion. Admiral Helen Price, now retired but still serving as an advisor to the nightly orders, joined Jake on the balcony overlooking Concordia's capital city. Below them, beings from across the galaxy walked, together in peace. Children of different species played in parks. Former enemies worked side by side building a better future. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just delivered those refugees and minded your own business? Helen asked. Jake smiled. Sometimes. But then I remember what Zethka told me about the old knights. They disappeared because people forgot what they stood for. I think we were just reminding the galaxy of something it already knew but had forgotten how to do. And what's that? That the strongest person in any room is usually the one willing to help someone weaker than themselves. On Earth, in classrooms around the world, children learned about the Great Awakening, the period when humanity had reminded the galaxy that power should serve to protect rather than dominate. They studied the battles and the heroes, but more importantly, they learned about the choices that ordinary people had made to stand up for what was right. In one such classroom, a young girl named Emma raised her hand. Teacher, could I become a knight too when I grow up? The teacher smiled. Anyone can choose to be a knight, Emma. You don't need special armor or weapons. You just need to decide that protecting others is more important than protecting yourself. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, similar conversations were happening. New generations were growing up with the understanding that strength meant lifting others up, not tearing them down. The nightly orders continued their work, but they were no longer unique. Ordinary beings everywhere had learned to make the choice between being a bystander and being a protector. The Age of Knights had not just returned to the galaxy. It had become part of who they all were. And in the vast darkness between the stars, that light of hope burned brighter than any sun, guiding travelers toward a future where no one would ever again have to face evil alone. The Knights had kept their promise. They had brought honor back to the galaxy, and it was there to stay.